so we are over, we said lesson 21 this morning. We're talking about Daniel. You can hold a finger or a marker there in the book of Daniel. And then I want you to come back just very, very briefly to 2 Kings chapter 24. So, Libro de Reyes capítulo 24. 2 Kings chapter 24. And we've come back here. There are two passages in the Old Testament. We're looking at one of them right now that are parallel in talking about the destruction of Judah and Jerusalem. It's 2 Kings 24, which is where we're turning. But the book of Chronicles is also going to cover this in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, and that's what we looked at last week. But what you have in 2 Chronicles 36 and 2 Kings chapter 24 is the account of kind of the end of the nation of Judah before they go off into Babylonian captivity. And what we find out is there are going to be 3 times that the Babylonians, under the leadership of King Nebuchadnezzar, 3 times that they come against Jerusalem. Each time they are doing a different amount of damage. The first time that they are going to come against Judah in Jerusalem is up here in 2 Kings 24, verses 1 through 5. Versos 1 a 5. And you have this kind of limited incursion into Jerusalem. And there are 4 notable people that are most likely taken away in this skirmish. Who do the Babylonians take away from Judah and Jerusalem at this point? Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego. There you go. So we've got those 4 who were taken prisoner here at the very beginning of 2 Kings 24, the very beginning of Nebuchadnezzar coming against Jerusalem. Beginning in verse 6, verso 6. Beginning there and going really through verse 16, verso 10, you have this second time that Nebuchadnezzar comes against Judah and Jerusalem. This time he takes more people and brings them back to Babylon and is going to kind of resettle them in Babylon. And amongst this group of people, who was the notable person that is taken to Babylon? This is Ezekiel, right, and this is what we talked about last week. During the second time, this is when Ezekiel is most likely taken into Babylonian captivity with a lot of the other residents of Judah. And then as you come down here to chapter 25, capítulo 25, this is when you're going to have the final time that Nebuchadnezzar comes against Judah and Jerusalem. This is going to happen in approximately 586 BC. What happens this last time that Nebuchadnezzar comes against Jerusalem? What's he do? He's going to destroy the temple, right? Knock down all the walls. And as you look down here at, I'm trying to find it for us, verse, well, where am I here? He's going to take away captive, verse 12, that's what we want. Verses 11 and 12, versos 11 y 12. During this final campaign against Judah and Jerusalem, verse 11, verso 11, then the rest of the people who were left in the city, and the deserters who were deserted to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the people, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away into exile. But the captain of the guard left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. So you have now nearly the entire population that has been deported. The only ones who are going to be left in the land are whom? Just the poorest of the poor, right? Nebuchadnezzar says, I don't want them. They stay. Nearly the entire population now of Jerusalem and Judah have been deported to Babylon. All right? This is what Daniel was hearing about. This is what Ezekiel was hearing about. And now it has finally happened. And how long are they going to be here in Babylonian captivity? 70 years, right? They're going to be in this Babylonian captivity 70 years. All right, so at the beginning of all of this, okay, the beginning of chapter 24, this first incursion of Nebuchadnezzar against Judah and Jerusalem. This is when Daniel's going to be taken captive, all right? So come back with me now to the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 1. And that sets our stage here. Most likely, how old are Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego when they are taken captive? They're most likely teenagers, right? Most likely teenagers. There's not a passage of Scripture that we can turn to that's going to give their exact age. But in Daniel chapter 1 and verse 3, these are the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and some of the nobles. And then verse 4 describes them as what? Children or youths, depending on your translation, right? So most likely we are looking at young people who are around teenage age. So Daniel is going to be taken captive. And question number one is this. What were the Hebrew names for Daniel and his friends? The four who were taken captive. Of course, given you one already. Daniel.
Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
There you go. We've got Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, I'm going to get on my preacher soapbox for 30 seconds here. We know his three friends as whom? From our times in Bible classes as little kids, we learned about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-Nego. Why do we know them by those names? Because those were not their given names. Those are the names that a foreign, ungodly nation gave to them. The names by which they were originally called were what? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now the follow-up to question number one, and I'm off my soapbox now. What do those names mean? What does the name Daniel mean? God is my judge. What does the name Hananiah mean?
The Lord shows grace.
The what? The Lord shows grace. Very good. What does the name Mishael mean?
Who is what God is.
Who is what God is. And finish us off here. What does Azariah mean, Doug?
The Lord helps.
The Lord has helped. Very good. All four of their names do what? They all glorify God. And so as soon as Nebuchadnezzar brings them over into Babylon, what's the first thing that he does? Changes their names. And their names are changed to names that now do what?
Reflect his gods.
That reflect the gods of the Babylonians, right? Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, Abed-Nego is most probably how we should pronounce that. Abed-Nego, which is in honor of some of these Babylonian gods. The point I would have us to see is simply this. They were given names originally that served to do what? Glorify the God of heaven. They are deported against their will to a foreign nation, and one of the first things this foreign nation tries to do is stamp out their identity and give them a new one. What better way to do that than what? Well, one thing they're going to do, change their names, right? And fundamentally change their names from names that would glorify the God of heaven to now names that would glorify their gods. What happens here in chapter 1? Do you remember the significant thing that goes on here in chapter 1? Yeah. There is food that is set before Daniel and his three friends, and they are hesitant to eat this food. Why are they hesitant to eat this food? There could be the deal that this is involved in being sacrificed to idols. There could be some association with idolatry here. The other idea is what? That this food would have been unclean, right? And either one of those is a distinct possibility. And so Daniel says what in verse 8?
He purposed in his heart not to defile with the portions of the king's delicacy.
This food that's set before him, Daniel says, I can't eat it. This would defile me. This would be sinful for me to do. And so he proposes this challenge. He goes up to the chief of the eunuchs and says, give us water and vegetables for 10 days, and then check us afterwards and check the others. And if we're not in a better condition than they are, then ostensibly we'll consent to what you say. But just give us this test. 10 days come by, and what happens? Daniel and his friends are in a better condition than the others. And so they begin to work their way up here in the kingdom. This is verse 17, verso 17. As for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. And that sets the stage for chapter 2. Because in chapter 2, who has a dream? Nebuchadnezzar is going to have a dream in chapter 2. Now, without interpreting it for me, what is his dream? What did Nebuchadnezzar see in his dream? And you're thinking, I don't even remember what I dreamed last night. How am I supposed to remember what Nebuchadnezzar dreamed? Okay, he has this vision, this dream of a statue. How many parts are there to this statue that Daniel sees? There are 4 distinct parts to this statue. And as he is watching this statue, what's happening in the background? There's a rock that's being cut out of a larger piece of rock without hands. And this rock begins to what? Grow. And then roll. And it begins to roll towards what? The statue. It hits the statue and does what? Destroys it. Okay. And then Nebuchadnezzar does what? He wakes up. What did that mean? What have I dreamed here? What's going on? And so, who does he call to himself? Verse 2, he gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dream. And so they came in and they stood before the king. The king said to them, this is verse 3, verso 3, capítulo 2. I had a dream and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. And the Chaldeans spoke and said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever, tell the dream to your servants and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied to the Chaldeans, the command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore declare to me the dream and its interpretation. What does Nebuchadnezzar say that is so difficult to his inner circle here?
I'm not going to tell you what the dream was.
I'm not going to tell you the dream. If you guys are so great like you say you are, then what?
You already know.
You tell me the dream. You tell me the dream, then you tell me the interpretation, and then we'll get along. Right? And you do all of that, and I'm going to take care of you. But you guys claim that you have all of this mysterious insight. If you can't tell me the dream, what am I going to do? I'm going to destroy you and everything that you have. So he really sets the stage here. Travis.
And in a backhand way, it implies that interpretations are a dime a dozen to something.
Yes.
Any signs and symbols, anybody can come up with an interpretation of it and make it sound good. And the king knows it doesn't necessarily make it right.
Here's the real test.
Right. And so
I've got information you don't have. Can you tell me what it is?
I think it goes, we have to be very careful when we read parts of the Bible that are written in symbolic and other language before we automatically jump to conclusions that I know what this
Good
means.
point. It's a good point. So, are they able to tell him the dream?
Nobody can do
Verse 10, right, the Chaldeans answered, verso 10, verse 10. There is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no Greek king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except gods whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. Nebuchadnezzar, you're making a request that is what? Impossible. Because of this, verse 12, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon, and that apparently includes whom? Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah have risen to this place in the kingdom. And so as they come to slay Daniel and his friends, Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch. This is verso 14, verse 14. The captain of the king's bodyguard who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. Daniel asked, why is this decree so urgent? Arioch tells him. Daniel says, give me a moment. Daniel goes in to pray. And Daniel is given the answer beginning in verse 19. And it says then in verse 24, verso 24 says to Arioch, take me before the king, and I will tell him everything that he wants to know. And so Daniel comes before the king in verse 27, verso 27. Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, as for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream, the visions in your mind while on your bed. And he tells Nebuchadnezzar the dream. And then he says in verse 36, here is the interpretation. So what was Nebuchadnezzar's dream ultimately about? Okay, we've got two things, right? Number one, God's going to establish his own kingdom. And tell me something we learn about that kingdom in this passage.
For the kingdom.
What does he tell us about the nature of that kingdom? It'll not be destroyed, right? But rather it will grow and it will consume the whole earth. Okay? And then the other thing, the other part of this dream concerns that statue. And what did that statue represent? Kingdoms, and specifically 4 kingdoms. And as Daniel retells it here, 4 kingdoms that appear in succession to each other. The first of which is Babylon. Start with me over here in verse 37. You, O king of the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given kingdom, and power, and strength, and glory. Wherever the sons of men dwell, of the beasts of the field, of the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them. You, O king, are what? You're the head of gold. Okay, so you're the beginning of all of this. Verse 39. After you what? After you will arise a kingdom inferior to you. This would be that chest and arms of silver in that statue. And then we come to the next part of the statue, verse 39. Then another third kingdom. So this kind of sets it clear for us. We're talking about kingdoms that are appearing in succession. First is Babylon. There's another one that's this chest and arms of silver. Then we've got this third kingdom of brass. And then we've got, verse 40, there will be a fourth kingdom. As strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. And this rock, verse 44, the days of those kings of God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. That kingdom will not be left for another people, but it will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it itself will endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will happen in the future. So the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. So he is giving ultimately a time frame for God to do what? God is going to establish his kingdom. Right? And the first thing we might say, well, hasn't God had a kingdom all along? Daniel had been a part of that kingdom, right? Okay, but here's a kingdom in a different sense, isn't it? Because this kingdom, this new kingdom that God is revealing, as you look here in verse 44, will never be destroyed. It will not be left for another people. What has happened to the kingdom that Daniel was a part of? It had been left for whom? The Babylonians. What had happened to his compatriots in the northern kingdom? That kingdom had been left for whom? The Assyrians. But this newer kingdom will not be left for another people. but rather it will crush all of these other kingdoms, put an end to other kingdoms, and it will endure forever. And it will spread across where? The whole earth. So now we're beginning to get a picture of this kingdom. We're not thinking kingdom in the normal sense. We're not thinking kingdom like a political, geographical entity. We're thinking more of a movement that's spreading where? Across all the earth. And in that it's spreading all over the earth, this movement, this spiritual movement is going to embrace whom? Everybody, specifically, to our point, the Gentiles, right? Okay, so that is kind of the prophecy that's going on here. Question number 3. What was Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 4 about? We're going to skip over chapter 3 here in the fiery furnace. Come over to chapter 4. What is Nebuchadnezzar's dream here in chapter 4?
The tree whose leaves.
Yeah, this big, beautiful, flourishing tree, and what happens to it? Yeah, it's stripped and cut down. And its stump is just left there. So Nebuchadnezzar has another quizzical dream. He wants an interpretation. So Daniel has to come in verse 19 and interpret this one. But how does Daniel feel about interpreting this one? This is a nervy moment. In fact, Daniel admits such. Verse 19, my Lord, speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, my Lord, if only the dream applied to those who hate you in its interpretation to your adversaries. Because Daniel knows what? You know, we talk in our study of the minor prophets that sometimes these prophecies are called burdens because they're so heavy and they're so challenging for the one who's delivering them. This would fit the bill. Daniel's about to have to say to one of the most bloodthirsty men on the face of the earth at this time, he's about to have to tell him what? You're about to get struck down by the God of heaven. The God of heaven, by the way, that I serve, he's going to strike you down. But give Daniel credit, that's exactly what he does. You're this tree. You have grown strong. Your majesty has become great. And you have begun to think that this is something that you have done all by yourself. Verse 29, 12 months later, Nebuchadnezzar was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. And the king reflected and said, is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty? And while the word was in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven, saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it has been declared sovereignty has been removed from you. You will be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field. You will be given grass to eat like cattle, and 7 periods of time will pass over you until you recognize the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and he bestows it upon whomever he wishes. And immediately what happens to Nebuchadnezzar? He is driven out, and he starts to do what? Starts to eat grass, right? How the mighty have been humbled, how the mighty have fallen here. And how long was this going to happen?
7 periods of time.
Yeah, 7 periods of time. Anyone's Bible use a different phrase? 7 times, which is a consistent way that you see time kind of delineated in Daniel's prophecies here. It's just an undetermined period of time. 7 what? 7 weeks? 7 months? 7 years? 7 days? We don't know. I don't even know if we're supposed to take the 7 literally here. 7 oftentimes in prophecy simply means what? Complete. Complete with respect to purpose. Nebuchadnezzar is going to be in this form until what? Until the time is right. Until he learns the lesson God intends for him to learn. And the lesson, and this is the point of chapter 4, the lesson Nebuchadnezzar needs to learn is what? God rules in the kingdoms of men. It's not you, Nebuchadnezzar. It's God who rules. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, we don't know how long the period was, but we do know it was long enough for his hair to grow long,
Yep.
for his fingernails to grow like the So, however long that takes.
Sure. Unless God just said boom and it all happens at once, then you're right. Then we've got this process of humiliation, really, that Nebuchadnezzar undergoes. And if the character of Nebuchadnezzar is anything like we have revealed in Scripture, it probably takes longer than a day for Nebuchadnezzar to learn this lesson. I think we could all agree with that assessment. All right. So God is going to judge Nebuchadnezzar in this way. And what's the end result here? Right? God's way works. And you come to verses 36 and 37. What does Nebuchadnezzar do in verse 37? Verso 37. What does Nebuchadnezzar do? He praises God. He praises and glorifies the God of heaven. Because all of his works are true and his ways are just, and he is able to humble those who walk with pride. It's a really interesting story as you go through the rest of Nebuchadnezzar's life. There's a question that folks sometimes ask, I think it's a legitimate one. Does Nebuchadnezzar come to belief in God? Certainly possible. Certainly possible.
I mean, he believed him. He knows, he saw his
Yeah,
power.
here, that there's, we're going to have some things later that might head to that a little bit, but it's certainly possible. Look at Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. Yes, Mitch, I'm sorry.
I think it would be interesting if we could talk to Nebuchadnezzar and ask him how he valued the experience after having been through it. None of us want to go through those sorts of experiences where we are humbled in any way, shape, or form, really. But there's value in it. And there's many cases, many contexts where we're going to have to be brought to our knees in some way. Otherwise, we're not ever going to be able to serve God because ourselves are in the way. I think Nebuchadnezzar would describe his experiences. I hope Nebuchadnezzar would describe his experience as being valuable after having been through.
Good point. Hold your finger in chapter 7. We skipped chapter 3. Come back to chapter 3 for just a moment. Capítulo 3. Let me build on what Mitch said there. Capítulo 3, verso 18. Chapter 3 and verse 18. Mitch's question, in case you didn't hear, was he wondered what Nebuchadnezzar's thought process would be after the fact. Would Nebuchadnezzar have been glad that he went through this because of the lessons that he learned? And we don't have an absolute answer to that. Here's what we do have, though. We do have an example of somebody who did go through trials, who were sustained in those trials because of their faith, even though they didn't know what the outcome would be, and then they're praised for their faith later. And that's Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Because in chapter 3, as they are being threatened with being thrown in the fiery furnace, what do they not know? If they're going to live. Look at chapter 3 and verse 18. As they are responding to Nebuchadnezzar, as he is telling them, you're going to do what I tell you to do. And they're saying, we're not. And we're prepared to face the consequences. And verse 18, as they are detailing those consequences, what do they say in verse 18?
But if not, let it be known to you, O king.
That's good, Bruce. I just needed that first part. You're right. They say to the king, we're not going to do it. Our God, verse 17, is powerful to deliver, and he can deliver, and we hope he'll deliver. Verse 18 begins, but if not. Did they know God would deliver them? Did they know that was God's? They didn't. They knew God had the power to. They didn't know if that was God's will for this moment, though. But come to Hebrews chapter 11. Look at Hebrews chapter 11, this great chapter of faith. Hebreos capítulo 11, verso 32. We're going to start Hebrews 11 and verse 32. So after he has gone through these great individuals of faith, he says there's even more I could talk about. What more shall I say? Time will fail me if I tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets, Who by faith, so we're describing people who had what? Who had faith, and back to Hebrews 11 and 6, without faith it is impossible to please God, okay? So here are people that have faith and please God. Who by faith, verse 33, conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, verse 34. Quenched fire. What other Old Testament story do you know that involves the quenching of fire? I struggle to think of one outside of this. There may be one. I have tried to think of one and I can't. I'm convinced he's talking about whom here? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. How many people since Scripture was written have been blessed by the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? Untold, right? We still talk about them this day. Did they know what the end of their story was going to be? No, they didn't.
Well, they knew God would take care of it.
That one way or another, they knew God would take care of them. What did that look like? No clue. You think it was a fearful moment being thrown into that fire that's been heated 7 times hotter than normal? And by the way, there's our 7 again. I don't know if that's to be taken literally. I think that's probably the idea. Hey, this is just incredibly hot, so hot that it's burning people outside the oven. You think that was a nervy moment? And then getting in there and realizing what? I'm not burning. I don't even smell like smoke. My clothes don't smell like smoke. And they come out. You think they would have had their story go any different? Once they came out, you think they would rewrite that story in any way? I don't think so. And I say all that then to build on Mitch's point and to say this. We will go through hardships in our lives. God has always promised to be with us. But God being with us doesn't mean we don't go through challenging moments. Daniel did, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah did, Joseph did, Samuel did. All these characters of faith did. But they got through those challenges by means of what? Faith. That's what Hebrews 11 is all about. They maintained their faith and they got through it. And coming through on the other side, they were better for it. And they have been a blessing to so many people for what reason? They maintained their faith in the face of great difficulty. If God is able to take those circumstances and use them to His glory and use them to build up and buoy other people who are about to go through those times or are in the midst of those times already, doesn't that then give you and me strength in those same moments to maintain the same faith and the same focus and a reason to come through on the other side so that others can look to us and draw strength from our example? But the way that we do that is by maintaining the faith and focus Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah had, that Daniel had, Samuel had, Joseph had, that all of these great figures of faith had. Good point there, Mitch. All right, back to, Bruce, did you have your hand up? No? Okay. I thought someone had their hand up and I skipped over. All right, Daniel 7. Come back to Daniel 7 with me. What is the heading to Daniel chapter 7 in your Bible? 4 beasts. Okay? Now just focus on that middle word. Ignore the and ignore beasts. You see 4. Does that give you a connection anywhere in the book of Daniel? 4 kingdoms, right? Chapter 7 is a callback to where? To Nebuchadnezzar's first dream, right? What you're seeing in chapter 7, which, by the way, look at chapter 7 and verse 1. This is the first year of whom? Okay, this is the first year of Belshazzar. But what happened to Belshazzar at the end of chapter 5 and verse 30. Yeah, he dies. So what do we have here? And this, our Western Civ minds, this just does not sit well with us. This is what? This is not in chronological order. And those of us who like to have things in chronological order are severely bothered by this kind of thing, right? But that's kind of us just superimposing our Western thought on things. God has it laid out in the order that he wants, and that's sufficient. And so we work through it and we figure it all out. One thing that I have seen here is just this message. This was a message that was given to Nebuchadnezzar. It's repeated to Belshazzar, and it is becoming important even in the midst now that the Medes and the Persians have taken over. The Medes and the Persians have taken over, but in essence the story is not over. Here you get the story of the four beasts, and you start with just this great beast, right? That's kind of akin to a head of gold. And then we kind of reduce down silver, brass, like that. You've got these four different beasts. And this all resembles chapter 2. Sometimes when you look at these beasts, you get a little bit of information. For example, verse 5. Behold, another beast, a second one resembling a bear. It was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in his mouth. So you've got a Quasimodo bear here, and he's been out eating barbecue. Got 3 ribs in his mouth. What's the significance of this bear being humpbacked, one side bigger than the other?
He's not as strong, he's unequal.
Could be it. This is the second beast. This is the Medo-Persian Empire, a confederation of 2 nations, one of which is a little bit stronger than the others. You've got this confederation, this Medes and the Persians. The bear humped up on one side, but he's got what in his mouth?
3 ribs.
He's got 3 ribs. What had the Medes and the Persians done to get to the point that they were at?
Defeated the Babylonians.
They defeated the Babylonians, defeated Syria, who had kind of been under the Babylonians, and they defeated Egypt. 3 ribs in its mouth, 3 dominant powers that they have overcome. And here it is, arise and devour much meat. Verse 6, after this I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard. What's a leopard? You didn't have your coffee this morning. That's a leopard. And we even recognize this today. What's significant about a leopard? Oh, guys, come on. You didn't have your coffee this morning, did you? They're fast. Right, they're fast. This is our third beast. This is our third kingdom. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece. Why associate Greece with a leopard?
Because they conquered a lot of land in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and they did so under the guidance of whom? Alexander the Great, who around 30 years old sits down and cries. Why? There's no more worlds to conquer. He's done it all by the age of 30. Look at how quickly this kingdom has spread. That's why you've got this picture of a leopard with 4 wings on its back. It's going magnificently fast. And then you've got this next beast that is just dreadful and terrifying. Extremely strong, large iron teeth, right? That's a callback to chapter 2, iron teeth. You come over to chapter 8, and let me just show you this real quick. Come over to chapter 8. And chapter 8 is going to build on chapter 7 and chapter 2. And you're going to focus on 2 of the beasts, 2 segments of the statue, the 2 in the middle. Except this time we're not going to call them beasts, we're not going to call them statues, we're going to call them what? A ram and a goat, okay? Chapter 8, you've got a ram and you've got a goat. What does the ram look like? 2 horns, but what? Verse 3. That we would expect after having read chapter 7. Talk to me about the horns.
One being higher than the other.
One's bigger than the other, right? Just like the bear, one's bigger than the other. So we're kind of talking about the same thing here. You've got this ram, and this ram is going, verse 4, westward and northward and southward. So it's coming out of the east. Very good. And then you've got this male goat in verse 5, and maybe we don't call it a goat, maybe we call it a unicorn because it's got one horn poking out of its forehead. And it comes and it does battle with the goat, it tramples the goat, it defeats the goat, and what happens to the horn? It breaks off, and what happens? 4 little horns come up in its place. And when we think about secular history, Alexander sits down and cries because there's no more worlds to conquer. He dies, and we're, oh dear, what are we going to do with his kingdom? And we come up with a plan that what's going to happen to Alexander's kingdom? Splits among his 4 generals. Lysimachus, Cassander, Seleucus, who am I missing? Ptolemy. Thank you. There you go. 4 little horns coming up in its place, not having the power of the first one. And just in case we're still struggling to figure out what's going on here, what does chapter 8 tell us? Look at chapter 8 and verse 20. Capítulo 8, verso 20. Chapter 8 and verse 20, we don't have to guess anymore. What's chapter 8 and verse 20 tell us?
Ram is Medo-Persia.
The ram is Medo-Persia, which then informs our understanding of chapter 7. And the bear, which informs our understanding of chapter 2. Here's Babylon to Medo-Persia. And verse 21, the shaggy goat unicorn is Greece. World empires, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then our 4th empire. We'll pick up and we'll finish Daniel next Sunday morning. Appreciate your good attention, your good participation. Thank you.